I would like to say that participants are welcome to interrupt me at any point of time. They can unmute themselves and ask me a question. I would like that. If they don't want to do that, then they can write their questions in chat room. I will request Professor Manu to keep an eye on the chat box if possible, and interrupt me if you think some question needs to be answered before I move on to the next topic, because I might not be able to keep an eye on the chat box while sharing my screen.
Sure, Professor Anirban. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's that. With that, let's start. Let's not waste any more time. Okay. So the first question to be answered is, what is game theory? Which is an important point to start with. So game theory is nothing but, it's a theory, it's a tool that can be used to talk about any kind of situation which has strategic interaction in that. So strategic interaction, as in there are multiple people in there, and everyone's decision affects not only themselves but everyone else as well. So in that kind of a situation, how to analyze that kind of a situation, how to decide what should I do when everyone else's action also affects me, and my action affects everyone else's in turn. So in that kind of a strategic interactive scene, how to analyze that and to decide what to do, that's the job of game theory. We play games, and not only the games of cricket and football and other sports, we play games every now and then in our daily life, every day, almost at every point of time. Like for example, these are some very frequent games that we play, that I can give you an example of. Say for example, driving. So driving, I mean, there are two very famous issues. One is if you are in a crossroad and you see somebody coming in front of you, or let's say you are driving in a very narrow road and somebody is coming in front of you, and one of you can come straight and the other person has to swerve a little bit to the left. So who will do that? Who will swerve at one side of the road? If both of you do that, then you both again stuck. So one of the drivers have to swerve at one side and another person have to swerve at the other side or come straight, then only you can cross the road. So your and the other driver's decision actually both affect each other, both affect the situation. Or else another very interesting example is, when you drive in the night, uh, there is rarely an occasion where you need to put your headlight in high beam. Putting the headlight in low beam is more than enough. But the problem with that is that, let's say everyone is driving and everyone is putting their headlight in low beam. And one day, suddenly, one person put their headlight in high beam, intentionally or unintentionally, put their headlight in high beam. The moment the driver in front of you puts that person's headlight in high beam, then you cannot see anything because yours is in low beam. So that high beam essentially blocks all your vision. So that moment you have nothing to do other than putting yours also in high beam. So, so two people who are driving in low beam, one person switched to high beam, made other person switch to high beam as well. Now extend this scenario to the whole city and to the whole country and to the whole world. That seems that there is no other option than driving with a high beam. You have to drive with a high beam. That's a kind of scenario that we get stuck at. So that's one kind of game we play. Another game we play that's literally in sports, penalty kicks. So when somebody, a footballer, is shooting a penalty kick, the player has many choices: shoot left, shoot right, shoot center, shoot up, down, corners, ground. There are a lot of options. So the player has to choose one of that, and the goalkeeper has to apprehend that. Goalkeeper has to understand beforehand what it's doing in order to actually save the goal. So that's also example of a game. Let's say you are in a shared apartment, either with your spouse or with your friends. Now you have finished your dinner and now it's time to do the dishes. So who will do the dishes? That's a very interesting question because nobody wants to do the dishes, but everybody wants the apartment to be clean. So if nobody does the dishes, the apartment will be, dirty. The kitchen will be dirty, but nobody will like that. But everybody will like that they won't work and everybody else will work. So everybody else's decision will affect the ultimate, we call in game theory, we call it as a payoff, as an utility. They're a little bit different, payoff and utility, but anyway, for this lecture, let's think of payoff and utility as the same thing. So everyone's decision affects everyone's payoff in doing dishes. Group project, that's another interesting thing. I am guessing a lot of students are here and those students have experience in group projects. Now, if you do group projects, you know that there will be people in a group who won't do anything ever. They're always the person who will not do anything, probably give some moral support. And that's the extent up to which they do. And there will be some people who will actually do the whole job for the group. Now, who will do that? Because if the person who is a doer, who actually does that, stops doing it, the group completely drowns. The group gets zero because no one else is working. So, and if you who decided to not work start working, then also something changes. The quality improves, the camaraderie improves, the friendship improves, the group becomes more cohesive. All of these things happen. So you get pleasure or you get some kind of a payoff out of that. So these are various kinds of games that we play in our life. And game theory is a tool to actually get inside these situations and tell you that, okay, if this is the situation, these are the options, then what do you need to do? Now, a very quick history of where game theory started. So it started very, very early. I mean, not game theory as a domain did not start very early, but the tools that we use as game theoretic tools now have started really early. As early as 1713, there was a written communication between Marmot and this French mathematician Marmot and British, I think Waldegrave, Charles Waldegrave, nobody really knew who he was, but probably he was a lawyer or something, I forgot. But there was a lot of disagreement between who was Waldegrave. So that was the first. So it is famous in mathematics called Waldegrave's problem, which is basically the first, first example of a mixed strategy in a game. And then in 1838, Cournot came and this is a very famous problem, the duopoly problem. It's the game theory 101, the second lecture, everybody will teach the duopoly of Cournot, which gave another very early indication of what we now call as Nash equilibrium. Then in 1913, Ernest Zermelo wrote a thesis on the game of chess, where he actually showed that the game of chess is a strictly determined game. So that's also, these all are before game theory was born as a subject. Game theory was born as a subject with John von Neumann, the phenomenal mathematician, in 1928 with the paper Theory of Games of Strategy. And then again, he wrote several papers, and in 1944, he wrote the formal book on game theory. From 1950s, actually, game theory got the attention of the corporate. So Rand Corporation started using game theorists to look at Cold War in a deterrence problem. And at the same time, a lot of that happened with Rand Corporation as well. Seminal concepts of game theory came into light, like concepts of Nash equilibrium, that was in 50s, concept of core, extensive form game, fictitious play, repeated games, Shapley value, Shapley-Shubik index, matching games. All of these, like 1950s was a very, very vibrant time for game theory, and at that time, a lot of these theories started coming. In 1960s, actually, it started coming into social sciences, politics, and international relations. Another watershed moment came in 1970s when John Maynard Smith brought evolutionary biology into game theory and brought evolutionary game theory into surface. And then again, then from 1970s, slowly it started changing a lot in its color and texture, and slowly it got absorbed into anything and everything. 1990s auction design management, actually it got into management, market and auction design, and then networks and communications protocol. And recent, if you look at recent, researchers, you will see game theory is used for deciphering human behavior, human bounded rational behavior. In neuroscience, game theory is being applied. In psychology, game theory is being applied, and so many other places. So game theory is kind of a tool that has a universal approach, mostly because of the theory behind it. The introductory part of the theory behind it is extremely easy to understand and extremely easy to apply as well for some part. The moment you get deeper into it, the moment you make your models more, complex, game theory actually loses a bit of its ground for computational complexity. But as long as it is in a basic level, game theory is very attractive. And game theory can answer some of the questions which no other theory can answer. I will come to that very soon. Now the question comes as, why will you use game theory? Now the answer is very simple. You will use game theory because the managers tell you to use that. I mean, there is two...
Anirban, there is one question, if I can interrupt.
Yes, yes.
Somebody asked, can John Nash be considered the father of game theory?
Okay, yeah. John Nash is cannot be considered as father of game theory. John Nash can at most be considered... I mean, John Nash is the father of Nash equilibrium, of course, but he is not the father of game theory, because game theory has been established as a research domain before John Nash. Now, in popular domain, you can always say Russell Crowe is the father of game theory, because after The Beautiful Mind, many people started looking at game theory, what it is and all. So yeah, in that sense, but in a strictly theoretical sense, no, John Nash cannot be called as a father of game theory. Thank you for the question.
Okay.
Okay. Now, yeah, so you can see that Raymond Smith of Bell Atlantic says that this fundamental redefinition of our business would not have been possible without a game theoretic approach to business strategy. Or Rory Sutherland of Ogilvy and Mather said the idea that your best move depends on what your competitors are doing and how you can influence their actions is seldom taken into consideration, and game theory is all about that. So you should study, if you're a management research student, if you're a student of management studies, you should study game theory because your boss has asked you to. That's a very simple answer. Okay. Now, the question is, where do we apply game theory in business? We understood the penalty kick, we understood the driving and all that, doing dishes, group project and all, but nothing is a business problem. Where does game theory come in business? Game theory come in business in myriad forms. Businesses can decide whether to adopt a standard or not. If everyone adopts a standard becomes a standard, otherwise it does not. So it's called coordination game. They can decide their strategy when the auditor is coming to audit. Somebody is asking a question? I guess not. Okay.
Yes, there was an interruption, but I didn't hear after that.
I also couldn't get. I think it was by mistake somebody unmuted or something.
Yeah, could be. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, so that auditing is also a game that businesses often play, that what strategy should they take before the auditors actually start sitting in their office. It's called the hunter and hunted game. Businesses often look at the pricing decisions, so whether to lower the price or not, what maintain the price lower now, lower next quarter, maintain in the next quarter, and go on, continuously drop and then again go up. What various kinds of pricing decisions can be taken, which is essentially a form of the game prisoner's dilemma. Businesses decide whether to enter a market. If enter a market, then when to enter a market, in what size to enter a market. This is essentially the game of war of attrition. Businesses decide whether to expand their capacity or not, if to expand, how much to expand, and when to expand. All of these decisions actually depending on the competitor's strategy as well. So these are some kind of a commitment game. Pollution abatement is exactly like, you know, group projects, that if everybody is signing the pollution treaty, I have no incentive of signing the pollution treaty, because then I am getting clean air and I can always pollute the air. So polluting the air costs less, so I am saving money, and everybody is signing the pollution treaty, so they are giving me the clean air, so I am the best. So I am getting the best of both worlds. So that kind of a game is always being played. Also external financing. So if I'm financed, or if I'm going to be financed from one financer and I am going to multiple other financiers, how much of the information do I reveal to the other financiers? How much do the information about my valuation do I reveal to the other financiers? All of these are the very, very frequent games that businesses play, and these all are standard games in the literature of game theory. Now the interesting part, that how do we actually apply game theory? Now, before applying game theory, let me tell you there are so many types of games. I mean, at a very top level, there are non-cooperative games and cooperative games, which I will talk about later. Others I won't talk about much. At another high-level differentiation, we have sequential move game, simultaneous move game. Another high-level differentiation is one-shot game or repeated game. And then there are so many other games like dynamic game, evolutionary game, stochastic game, differential game, mean field games, and so many others. So game theory has developed as a very, very rich domain of research, and it has so many avenues, so many different types of games to be played. Anyone interested, you can look at that in a more detailed manner. Now, I will concentrate on the first two, the non-cooperative and the cooperative games. Non-cooperative game, simply put, it's a game between the players who cannot form a binding contract. Who cannot form a binding contract between themselves. Now, who cannot legally form binding contracts? Let's say competitors in a business. Now you have Vodafone, you have Airtel. Now Vodafone and Airtel legally, although they do it behind the scene, but legally they cannot form a binding contract about pricing of a package. Because if they do, then actually they can actually set a binding contract that they will put the highest price ever possible for every package, and customers will essentially be at loss. So in order to stop that, competitors in a business cannot form a binding contract about setting price or things like that, which in the term of legality, we call it a cartel. A cartel is not always allowed. Or say bidders in an auction. In IPL, if Mukesh Ambani and Shah Rukh Khan, they sign a pact among themselves legally that, okay, you take Virat Kohli, I will take Dhoni, and we will not fight for each other's player. If that kind of contract is signed before the bidding, then basically players can be bought at zero price, because players are already assigned before the bidding. The contract is done. So that's not also legally allowed. Auditor and auditee. Let's say CAG and Reliance Industries, and for example, in recent news, CAG and the government. So, these are games where auditor and auditee cannot really form a binding contract among them that, okay, fine, look, I am writing these in my accounts, and you come and say that everything is fine. So then there is no point of an audit. So they also cannot form legally a binding contract. And all of these falls into the area of non-cooperative game. But on the other hand, cooperative game is a game between multiple players who can form a binding contract. Now, who can form a binding contract? Let's say there are partners working towards a common good. Or let's say the Paris Agreement for the global warming. So partner nations who are signing in Paris Agreement, they are forming a binding contract that we are a part of this agreement and we agree to follow by these rules. because they are working towards a common good. This kind of a situation falls under the domain of cooperative game. Or service providers working towards integration of a business. Let's say there is a supply chain, and there are several logistics partners. Now they are supposed to sign a binding contract before getting into the business. Companies producing wealth through joint effort. Let's say you are watching Netflix, or you're watching a film which is produced by Paramount Studio or MGM. Now, Netflix and MGM, or Netflix and Paramount, are both coming together and producing. I mean, one is producing and one is taking it up to your bed, to your hall. So they are producing wealth through their joint effort, and thus they have to sign a contract. Manu?
Anirban, before you go ahead, there is one question.
Yeah.
This is not about non-cooperative or cooperative game. It's just about going a bit back. So you mentioned about the use of game theory in the context of various climate change treaties. And Samadip says that it seems very lucrative application. And he or she is asking, are there any significant works in this domain using game theory?
In the context of climate change treaties, I mean, right. So I don't remember exactly now that if there is any game theoretic paper which treats the issue of nations joining the climate change treaty. I mean, at a very broad level, this is a very simple game where we predict in a very pessimistic manner that nobody will sign the treaty. But essentially, some of the nations sign the treaty and some don't. So there are not exactly in climate change, but in behavioral game theory, there are actually a lot of papers which show that why these kind of treaties are successful, and what drives what kind of clause these treaties should have to make it successful. So this is in the domain of behavioral game theory as well as in the domain of mechanism design. So these both of these domains together produce these kind of papers. If you want to know more, you can send me an email. I can send you some relevant papers about that. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's about cooperative game. Now, what I would like to do is give you an example of what a non-cooperative game looks like and what a cooperative game looks like. So this is a famous non-cooperative game. We know it as Prisoner's Dilemma. So I will read this out to you. Let's say Tanya and Cindy have been arrested for robbing the Hibernia Savings Bank and placed in separate isolation cells. Before going more into the problem, I would like to tell you that Tanya and Cindy do not work for the same organization. They are both hired robbers from two different robbery organizations. So somebody who wants the bank robbed consulted two robbery organizations and got one robber from each organization. So they have no reason to care about each other. They don't care about each other. They care only about themselves. Okay. So now, a clever prosecutor, after their arrest, makes the following offer to each. The prosecutor says, you may choose to confess or you can remain silent. Now, if one of you confesses and other remains silent, then the person who is confessing goes free. I'll let you go. But because you confessed and the other person remained silent, I'll make sure that the other person does serious time. The same will happen if you remain silent and your partner confesses. Then your partner goes free, and I'll make sure that you get really serious time. But it can happen that you both confess. In that case, I will get two convictions and I will make sure that you get an early parole. But if both of you remain silent, I have to settle for just small, very token sentence for firearms possession charges. So if you wish to confess, you must leave a note with the jailer before my return tomorrow morning. Now see, it clearly says that if they remain silent, it's the best option for them, because actually the prosecutor has no evidence. The prosecutor is entirely basing the whole case on confession. So there is no evidence. So if they remain silent, they actually get nothing. They get very little time, maybe for 2 months, 3 months, and then they're out. So that is the best choice for them. But unfortunately, if I know that the other player will remain silent, then it is in my best interest to confess. Because if the other player remains silent and I confess, I will go free tomorrow. So why do I spend another 3 months? I will rather go free tomorrow. So if the other player will remain silent, it is in my best interest to confess. But what happens when the other player is as intelligent and wise as I am and knows that I'm planning to confess? That's where the things get interesting. So I know that I should confess if the other player remains silent, and I also know that the other player knows it. But the question is, does the other player know that I know that she knows? So it sounds convoluted, and you can actually make this reasoning as much iterative as you can. Does she know that I know that she know that I know? So, and it goes on. And when this infinite loop ends, at that point we say that we have attained common knowledge. That we all know what is to be known, and we all know in iterative term that the other person also knows about my knowledge, about the other person's knowledge, about my knowledge, and so on. We call that a complete the common knowledge. So in that domain of common knowledge, game theory says eventually we both confess, because if the other player remains, if I imagine that the other player is remaining silent, it is best for me to confess. And if the other player is confessing, then also it is best for me to confess. So this is something in game theory we call as dominant strategy. So confessing in this game is a dominant strategy, dominating over everything else, and eventually they both confess. Although we both knew that it was the worst choice for us. Together it was the worst choice. But who cares about togetherness? When we decided what to do, we didn't think about togetherness. But also another question can come, but you could do better. Of course I could do better. But the question that comes here, I could do better, but could I do any better alone? Could I do any better all by myself? Could I do any better without any change from the other side? The answer is no. If you have to do any better, the other person also have to do any better. You can both move together out of confess, and remain silent, and can do better. That's the only way to do better. So you cannot alone do any, when you are in the confess box, you cannot go out alone and do better. Now is the time, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce the theory of Nash equilibrium in our webinar. So this is the precise definition of Nash equilibrium. It's a set of strategies, one for each player, set of actions, one for each player, where when they are in that combination, nobody has any incentive to move out of that combination alone. So if everyone else is doing what they're doing, I have no incentive to go out. It's just like that headlight game in driving. If everyone is putting their headlight in high beam, I have no incentive. I mean, I cannot gain by moving to low beam. Although if we all move to low beam, then we gain. But unless all moves to low beam, any one person moving to low beam, or even a subset of the whole population moving to low beam, achieves nothing, neither for the society nor for those people. So that kind of a very attracting package is called Nash equilibrium. We'll see about an application of that very soon. A common example in business of this game is price war between two companies. And when I talk about an example, I will show you about the price war. Now, moving on to the example of a cooperative game. Now, this is a very famous example of a cooperative game. This is the OPEC cartel, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now, OPEC is world's largest cartel and probably the only cartel which is legally approved. This is an intergovernmental organization of 13 nations. It started with 5 nations, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. And since 1965, it's headquartered in Vienna, Austria, although Austria is not a part of OPEC. It has, as of 2018, it has 13 member countries, and it accounts for 81.5% of the world's proven oil reserves, giving OPEC a major influence on global prices, setting a global price. Previously, this kind of monopolistic decision was on the Seven Sisters, the major 7 oil companies, and now actually OPEC has got the upper hand for that. Now, where cooperative game theory comes in is, once this cartel exists, for each country, there is a decision of whether to join OPEC or not, and OPEC has a decision whether to take that country within its fold or not. Now, this is essentially a cooperative game theory problem, and cooperative game theory has many similar kind of problems addressed. Okay. Now, let me go through some applications of game theory in the traditional areas of management research: supply chain management, marketing, HRM, finance. It's not like game theory is not applied in other areas of management. I just chose these 4 because I also have a time restriction. So I just chose 4 to give you a sample. Now, once you see that, maybe you will be motivated enough to find out other examples of game theory application in other domains of management research. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just a representative sample, which essentially talks about, some applications which actually changed the course of that research. So I will mainly cite some papers which are early and quite likely seminal in nature. So I will talk about first we'll talk about supply chain management. So because game theory has, in my opinion, has most been applied in supply chain management within the management research domain. So there is this classic news vendor problem, and the application has 2 retailers competing on product availability. This Cashan and Netizen in 2006 paper, they have like a huge array of models to solve this problem. They have probably approached this problem in every possible kind of game theoretic modeling. Then there is reverse logistics supply chain, which can be modeled as a stochastic game, which is done in 2001 by Majumdar and Gronwald. Wholesaler versus news vendor. So this is again a very classic problem. Someone is setting price and another is setting the stocking quantity. So how do these match so that they agree? So this is the kind of game which can be modeled as a repeated game, which is modeled in 1999 paper by Debo. Multiple retailers sharing warehouses. So let's say there is a situation where multiple retailers are there. They have their own warehouses, but they also have, let's say in the dock or at the airport, there is there's a shared warehouse. There are shared warehouses where they also stock their goods. So in that case, what are the strategic decisions that can come here is studied by Anupende in 2001 in a form of Biform games. So Biform games is basically a combination of cooperative and non-cooperative game. So Brandenburger actually, I think when Brandenburger was the first one who mentioned about Biform games. Then there is a game of that's again a classic game in supply chain management: manufacturer versus supplier. This forecast versus capacity. So I have so if I am a supplier, I have a forecast, I have a demand forecast, but I have every incentive to actually inflate the forecast so that I can be ready for any kind of demand spike. But the cost of that actually has to be borne by the manufacturer. So in supply chain management, there's a related concept called bullwhip effect, and how to actually mitigate the bullwhip effect using game theory. So that is also a very interesting game. Cashan and Lariviere has dealt with it in 2001. Then there's contracting issues between manufacturer and suppliers. What kind of contract, what kind of clauses should be there? That can be modeled as a screening game. If there are, let's say, multiple retailers and I know my demand, I don't know others retailers' demand. So how do I plan my business? That's called a Bayesian game. Also, there is recent application in green supply chain management of evolutionary games about how to structure the subsidy in green supply chain to actually incentivize companies to adopt the green supply chain processes. So that's been modeled as evolutionary game by Tian and others in 2014. Now, if we move on to the applications of game theory in the marketing domain, in marketing, pricing and advertisement are two areas where it has pricing, advertisement, and also information. Decision about information. These are the three areas where most of the attention of game theory has been put into. Dynamic pricing has been modeled as differential games way back in 1986. Eric von Hippel wrote a whole book about when to provide trade information to competitors based on game theory in 1988. Use of information in the study of competitive behavior has been studied as a game by Karnani in 1984. Bargaining strategy and information, this is a seminal paper by Larry Samuelson and Kalyan Chatterjee, 1983. Market strategy, and studying market strategy, studying market share, has been modeled as a game in 1977. What kind of advertisement should we proceed? Should we go for informative vis-a-vis persuasive? In 1985, we have seen a model of that in Werner Feld. Advertising expenditure in interdependent markets, or what we know as coupled markets. So expenditure in one market has its effect on the sales in other, not only that market, but in other markets as well. In that situation, how do we decide on the level of expenditure in advertising in each of those markets? That has been studied by Shakun in 1965. Now, human resource management, I have put human resource management in this slide for a reason, that human resource management is one area of management research where game theory applications were not in a great deal. Game theory applications are not really there a lot. One reason is HRM is mostly a qualitative subject, and game theory is mostly an offshoot of mathematics, so it's a quantitative one. So there were not a lot of quantitative research in HRM, which have recently started actually, and after it started, game theory has also seeped in HRM with its applications. Game theory models has been developed to understand firm and employee interaction 2008 as a dynamic game, or resource allocation within the firm as a cooperative game has been modeled. Employee-employer interaction during recruitment as well as during appraisal has been studied as a game model. Strategic aspects of knowledge flow within organization has been studied as a game model. Now, these all are very important part of HRM, and these all used to be studied in a qualitative manner earlier, and some researchers started the quantitative approach to taking this, and the moment you start taking quantitative approach in this, actually this is all about strategic interaction, and you cannot avoid game theory in these kind of scenarios. In finance, again, there's a whole lot of operation both in asset pricing and corporate finance area. So there's a 1979 Bhattacharya's paper that is also again a seminal paper, dividends as signals. How to pay dividends, because dividends can actually play the role of signal in the market. So how do we decide on the dividend payments? Capital structure has a signaling model. Capital structure has an agency cost model. Signaling model is, let's say, managers versus capital markets. Agency cost model has been seen from two angles. One is equity holder versus debt holder, equity holder versus manager in 1989 paper. There is this, very, very famous paper by Myers in 1984, which starts the theory of pecking order, which is essentially a game theoretic structure. And Rock in 1986 talks about underpricing in IPOs and models it as an adverse selection game. Intermediation has been modeled as a game. Asset pricing has been modeled as a game with asymmetric information. Market manipulation models, of course, have been studied as a game. So there are several other applications of finance, other areas of finance where game theory is regularly and heavily applied. Okay. So now that we have an overview of what is non-cooperative game theory, what is cooperative game theory, and we don't really know how to proceed with that, but we know what, and we have seen that there are so many papers where game theory has been applied to management research in various areas of management research. I think now it is time so that we move on to some examples to make the situation a bit more, clear. So let's see. Let's get our hands dirty in this. The first example that we will be talking about is an example of a non-cooperative game. So this is a case of two cement companies, United Cements and Associated Cements. United Cement has two plants. One is an 8,000 ton plant, one is a 2,000 ton plant. And Associated has only one plant, which is 20,000 ton plant. Now, the market is such that both firms produce 50% of their capacity. The demand is not anymore, 50% of the capacity is there. Let's say the market price is about 5 million per 1,000 tons, and the cost is around 2 million per 1,000 tons. So there is a profit of 3 million per 1,000 tons. Now, the marketing study of the marketing teams of each of those companies have come up with some kind of idea that if one of the firm reduces the price to 4 million, half of others' customer move to it. What happens if both reduces? The market share remains same. So you can see now that United has two plants, 8,000 and 2,000. So they can produce 10,000 tons, but they both produce at 50% capacity. So United produces 5,000 tons, and Associated produces 50% of 20,000, which is 10,000 tons. So United produces 5,000 tons, Associated produces 10,000 tons. That's the market right now. So if one firm reduces its price from 5 million to 4 million, half of the customer from the other firm moves to this firm, the low priced firm. What happens if both lower the price? Then the market share remains exactly same, nothing changes. We are assuming demand also doesn't change. I'm sorry. Now, the thing is that somebody came in that city and wants to buy United's smaller plant and make a shopping mall there. That guy has no interest in the cement industry. It just wants that land. It wants to take the smaller plant and make a shopping mall out there. Question is, what should be the selling price of the plant, and should it be sold at all? And the goal is to solve these two questions with only these information which is there on your screen right now. So here the non-cooperative game theory will come, and let's say we'll see two situations: when the smaller plant is not sold and when the smaller plant is sold. In these two situations we'll see, and in each situation we will look for the strategic interaction where both of the firms has an option of lowering their price. So they have two choices. They can lower their price to 4 million, or they can maintain their price to 5 million. So each firm has two choices. Associated has two choices: maintain their price and lower their price. United also has two choices: maintain their price and lower their price. Now in this matrix, these values, the first one is in the corresponding box, the maintain box. I've written 15, 30. That means that 15 billion is the profit of United when they both maintains prices. So this cell is when they both maintains price. There, the first one is the profit of United Cements. The second one is the profit of Associated Cements. Now you can calculate these. because if United maintains the price and Associated lowers its price, half of United's customer move to Associated. United anyway was selling 5,000 ton. Half of it goes away, so United sells 2,500 ton. And we have a $3 million profit per 1,000 ton, so it essentially comes down to 7.5 billion profit. And United was selling 10, and plus 2.5, Associated was selling 10, and plus 2.5 of United's came because Associated lowered its price. So Associated now are selling 12.5, but the profit margin also has come low because Associated has lowered its price from 5 to 4. The profit has come down to 3 to 2. So 12.5 into 2, 25 billion is the profit. So similarly, we can calculate all these. Now, just as we calculated the Nash equilibrium by argument in the prisoner's dilemma game, we can do the same here, and we can find that actually this lowering their price, both lowering their price, is something that is going to happen eventually. Because let's say United maintains its price. If United maintains its price, what is the best that Associated can do? If it maintains, it gets 30. If it lowers, it gets 25. So it is best for Associated to keep it at 30. So it's best for Associated to maintain. But if United lowers the price, you look at the second row, United lowers the price, then Associated had two choices. One choice gives 15 billion profit, one choice gives 20 billion profit. So Associated will of course choose lowering the price. So if United lowers price, Associated will also lowers price. Similarly, if you see from the other side, if Associated chooses to maintain the price, if you look at the first column, you will see United has all incentive to lower the price. If Associated lowers the price, then also United has all incentive to lowers the price. So United, come what may, it is best for United to lower the price, and if United lowers the price, it is best for Associated to lower the price. So they are stuck in a box which is worse for both of them. So they could have gotten 15 billion and 30 billion, but now because they are in a price war, this is called a price war, they are in a price war, they cannot come out of this low price Nash equilibrium. Now this is the situation when the plant is not sold. But what happens if the plant is sold? Okay, that's magical. It was this when the plant is not sold. When the plant is sold, everything is same, but only one cell's value has changed and Nash equilibrium has shifted there. Because if the second plant is sold, when United lowers its price and Associated maintains, United is supposed to get half of Associated's demands to it. So United was selling 5,000, Associated was selling 10,000. If United lowers, then Associated's 5,000, that is 50% of what Associate was selling, should come to United. So United gets to sell 10,000, but United has already sold its second plant of 2,000 tons. So United is only left with 8,000 tons. It cannot produce 10,000. So it can only produce 8,000. So with lowering price, it gets 16 billion. And because United could not take all of Associated's 50%, Associated maintains its price and sells 7,000 ton. So essentially getting a 21 billion profit. And you can see that the Nash equilibrium of this game is at this, is at the low price maintain box, where United gets 16 billion, Associated gets 21 billion, whereas if the plant was not sold, United would have gotten 10 billion, Associated would have gotten 20 billion. So they are both actually doing better by United's selling off the plant. So interestingly, actually United should actually pay the buyer to take the plant off their hands. That will be good for the market. They should not take any money, they should pay it. They should pay the buyer that I'm paying you $1 billion, please take this plant away from my hand and make a shopping mall out there so that we all can profit. That's strange. Before game theory, it would have been difficult to explain these kinds of this kind of an analysis that only game theory can supply. This is in economics, we call it judo economics. So anyone interested can look up what is judo economics, where you use the opponent's size against the opponent's strength. So that so anyway, so this is an interesting example where we see that in standard analysis, if you just do the profit and loss kind of analysis, you can never come to this conclusion that United should actually pay the buyer to take the plant off their hands. And you can actually, it is very difficult to realize or to visualize the fact that taking the plant off their hands will actually benefit both of them in the long run, in the equilibrium situation. So that's very interesting insight that game theory offers. Okay, now let's move on to another example, which is an example of a cooperative game. Let's see about politics. So last year, 2019 assembly election, Maharashtra, NDA was fighting against UPA. NDA has two main parties in Maharashtra. One is BJP, one is Shiv Sena. UPA has two major contenders in Maharashtra. One is Congress, one is NCP. So these were the four major parties which were actually fighting the election, and then there were others. These are the opinion and exit polls, which actually shows that there is opinion polls showed that there is very likely, even exit polls, that it's very likely that NDA will make a clean sweep. That was very likely before the poll and during the poll. The most popular opinion was that. Now, when the result came, they didn't really sweep, but they won. NDA actually won till the first hour after the announcement of results. So till 1 hour after the announcement of results, NDA was winning. After 1 hour, suddenly there was no NDA. Shiv Sena chief Uddhav Thackeray, he suddenly came out to in the public and said that, okay, I am not in NDA anymore. I am quitting. I am coming out of NDA because he is alleging that BJP promised an equal share of chief ministership to Shiv Sena, and after the results, they are denying it. So they are offended. Shiv Sena is offended. So Thackeray is coming out of NDA, breaking the pre-poll coalition. Now that's interesting. You can see the numbers here that BJP got 105, Congress got 44, NCP got 54, and Shiv Sena got 56. Whereas in Maharashtra, to form the government, you need 145 seats. So none of them have that. Now the question is, who all will join to form the government? There was a lot of drama in 2009 Maharashtra election. First of all, what BJP did is BJP tried to break NCP from UPA and formed a government which I think lasted for 3 days. And then the government broke because that NCP realized that this is not going to work. So NCP came back to UPA, and then Shiv Sena essentially convinced NCP and UPA to come together and join Shiv Sena to form the government. And in return to that, Thackeray offered the deputy chief minister post to NCP as well. So, and that's when the government was formed. So a lot of horse trading, a lot of to and fro, a lot of breaking and making of coalitions happened. But can we explain this using game theory? Now, fortunately, there is a very simple tool in cooperative game theory, which we know as power index. Especially one of the earliest power index is Shapley-Shubik power index by, of course, Shapley and Shubik. So this power index essentially tells you that if there are multiple parties and there is a talk that there's, let's say they have to come to an agreement kind of a thing, or they have to get something done, but everyone has their own way of getting that thing done. Now, based on the power of each, based on the relative position of each party or each participant, each group in that congregation that we are talking about, Shapley-Shubik power index tells you, it gives an index for every party. It gives an index between 0 to 1 for every party. So that, and that index is essentially representative of the bargaining power, that who has the most bargaining power in this group. That can be found out by this power index called Shapley-Shubik power index. Now, there are more power indices. There are Banzhaf power index, and there are other power indices that has developed on Shapley-Shubik power index, but Shapley-Shubik remained as popular as ever. So in this question, in this election result that we have seen, how do we apply Shapley-Shubik power index? We will see two situations again. When all the parties are viewed as individual parties, and in other situation, when NCP and Congress are viewed as a single entity, as UPA, because they didn't have a fight. Shiv Sena and BJP had a fight, so there is no NDA. But UPA can be there, NCP and INC. So we'll do two analysis. One is everyone is individual, one is NCP and INC are together as a group. Now, when everyone is individual, if we do the Shapley-Shubik index calculation, we see that these are the bargaining power for each party. BJP has 0.5, Shiv Sena, Congress and NCP has 0.167, others have 0. Okay, so BJP has disproportionately large bargaining power. That means whatever BJP says should be done. That's the analysis of these indices. That if the situation is like this, then BJP has the most bargaining power. But when we consider, we just change a little bit and club NCP and INC together. We just club Congress and NCP together and calculate the Shapley-Shubik index again. Wow. Now everything has changed. So BJP, Shiv Sena and the INC-NCP group, let's call it UPA, BJP, Shiv Sena and UPA, all three has exactly equal bargaining power in this game, 0.33. So you can see that BJP's best interest is not to make it happen. So what BJP did is first broke Shiv Sena, so that Shiv Sena can be seen as an individual. Second, tried to break UPA so that NCP and INC can be seen as an individual. The moment that is achieved, BJP got the highest power, BJP got the highest bargaining power and formed a government with Devendra Fadnavis as the chief minister. But the moment Shiv Sena convinced INC and NCP to come together, the whole power equation changed, and Shiv Sena actually lured NCP by giving the deputy chief ministership, and NCP had its ties with UPA, with Congress. So there was a huge loss if NCP had moved on to BJP in the central politics. So NCP came back, and the moment NCP came back, BJP actually lost all its bargaining power, and Shiv Sena, INC and NCP formed the government. Now you can ask many questions here. You can ask questions like, why then Shiv Sena? Why the chief minister is not from INC and NCP? I can see all of them are equally powerful. So these questions can be actually answered through some more careful, a more detailed modeling of game theory. I do not have time to go for that, but all I can assure you, if you can trust me, that yes, it can be done and the result can be achieved. So game theory is actually able to predict the outcome in this case. So that is what I wanted to talk about, and I am ready to take the questions now. These are some of the works that I have cited in this presentation, and these are some of the leading game theoretic applications in management research. So thank you. I don't know about listening. It's an era of Zoom. At least you have logged in. You did not log out. So that's great. I'm really thankful about that. Yeah. So any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Anirban, for this nice talk. So there are a couple of questions. I didn't want to interrupt the flow in the middle, so I didn't ask while the talk was going on, but I'll just start asking one by one on people's behalf. So the first question is, can cooperative game theory be applied to any oligopoly industry structure?
Cooperative game theory be applied to any oligopoly industry? Yes, it can be applied to any oligopoly industry structure as long as there is an option of contracting. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, is there anything more you would want to add on it?
Not really now, because oligopoly industry structure. Whenever you are talking about oligopoly, it's a very general term. There can be several constraints on that. So some constraints can make the application of cooperative game theory redundant there. So let's say, I mean, but whenever you are making a joint decision, any even in an oligopoly market, any oligopoly industry structure, there can be cooperative game, because there will okay, there is something that has come. Okay, yeah. So I will come to that later. Yeah. So in that oligopoly industry structure, cooperative game theory can be applied whenever the firms are allowed to take a joint decision. So what do I mean by taking a joint decision? Taking a joint decision can be orchestrated by taking over, can be by merger and acquisition. All these are things that can be done in a cooperative game theory manner.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, going to another question. So basically, somebody asked emerging trends in business competition. The word is competition, which is the combination of cooperation and competition between two firms is picking up. So how would game theory help characterize this practice? Does it come under Biform games?
Yes, yes, it does come under Biform games. It is the combination of cooperation and competition. And if you want, you should read this paper by Brandenburger, and I think Brandenburger and Nailbuff. The paper is called The Right Game. The name of the paper is The Right Game, which is an excellent exposition on this co-optation into the business. They describe it through a lot of various case studies. They talk about the famous NutraSuite case study. They talk about NVIDIA games case study, and various business scenarios they have taken, and Ford also, the famous Ford study. They all of these case studies they bring in and explain how a combination of cooperation and competition, which is co-optation, can actually be useful. Biform games is a formal representation of that. Biform games is not explained in the Right Game article. It's mostly a management article, but Brandenburger has the paper on Biform games, which is the first paper. So you can read that. It does come under Biform games, yes.
Okay. So here is a question from Vikas. He asks, in the previous example, I think the example he is referring about the price of war, the one which you explained in, I mean, I think the first example among
Yes,
the
yes,
two.
yes.
So he's
Yes,
saying,
yes. I was expecting this question. I saw the question. I
okay.
was expecting this question, because when I teach this in my class, this is the first question that everyone asks. Yes, of course. Because the problem is that the numbers which were there are only indicative of their profits, and we were only thinking in terms of profits. The moment you bring others' sorrow to add to your pleasure, you have to change those numbers. So if your profit is 16 billion and you are happy that your opponent lost 5 billion, so you have to have a method to convert your happiness of opponents losing 5 billion into a number which you can add to your happiness about your profit. So that will be your utility. So in the first I said payoff and utility are a little bit different. So this is why they are different. Payoff is 16 billion. Utility is 16 billion plus or minus the happiness or sorrow that I incur based on how my opponent is right now. So if my opponent is sad, I'm happy. If my opponent is happy, I'm sad. And incorporating that with my profit is something we call as utility of that payoff.
Okay, okay, okay. So yeah, further going, here is a question from Diganta. He's asking, in a dynamic setting, yes, but
I
this is
think he answered to the previous question.
okay, 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 okay. I get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, another one is about sharing the bibliography. So if you could share the slides, I can just share it with.
I will of course share the
audience.
slides, no problem.
And I guess there are no more questions.
There is a question.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Can game theory be applied in situation involving the tragedy of
Tragedy
commons?
of Commons.
Yeah.
Tragedy of Commons is a game. Tragedy of Commons is a very famous. So Tushar, we talked about Tragedy of Commons in this presentation when we were talking about doing dishes. That is essentially
Yes,
Tragedy
yes,
of
yes,
Commons.
yes, yeah, yeah.
So yes, game theory can be applied.
Yeah.
Pulkit asked a question
Yes.
that
Can you explain the Zomato acquisition of Uber Eats in terms of game theory?
Okay. See, right now, no, I cannot. But you give me enough data, yes, I think I can. Because the question comes again here that Zomato was in a competitive market. Uber Eats also was in a competitive market where there was also Swiggy and various other competitors in local places. So the moment I acquire somebody, you can see it from two perspectives. One is you can look at from the cooperative game theory perspective that essentially there were three players in the market and three players have had 1/3 of bargaining power in the market, 1/3 of share. So I'm essentially, if I buy out my competition, then I can raise my market share. So the thing to consider in this is the cost. Now, Zomato acquired Uber Eats. Zomato, Uber Eats, and Swiggy both were the giants in the market at that point of time. So when Zomato acquired Uber Eats, there was no risk of actually losing out on the customer. So essentially, that acquisition ensured that market share has been raised. So the point is that should we play as three different players, or can two of them collude and make a stronger opposition to the third one? Now that is if we get the data, we can actually analyze that who becomes more powerful after the collusion. There can be also a thing that now that Zomato has bought Uber Eats, what will happen if Zomato buys Swiggy? So then it becomes a monopoly market essentially. Zomato is the only one who is playing in this market and nobody is going to stop that. Reliance Industries is on the way to become monopolistic in Indian market. So there is no rule to stop it. But why is it possible? Because it is profitable. Why is it profitable? Because that coalition, that merger made sense in terms of profit. How can we understand that the merger is profitable? Is market share the only metric? No, market share is not the only metric. The metric is essentially, if we talk about game theory, the metric is marginal contribution. So without Uber Eats, what was Zomato making? With Uber Eats, what is Zomato making? So bringing Uber Eats into the Zomato structure is beneficial to Zomato or not. Similarly, from the side of Uber Eats, if I sell myself, what do I get than what I was getting without selling myself? So if I sell myself to Zomato, then is my total gain better? So if it is better from both the sides, then it is better for both of them to actually join hands. So that's what happened.
So the basic thing here that confused me was that they totally removed the plates and there were just two platforms left, Zomato and Swiggy. So they basically, what I think that they did a favor for Swiggy by removing a competition and buying it.
Of course, they did a favor for Swiggy. They of course did a favor for Swiggy because now the market has only two people. But the point is,
they took the pain and did a favor. So I was
Uh,
thinking about there was some
but
strategy
you
involved
don't.
in.
There is of course a strategy involved. The strategy is tomorrow. What is tomorrow? So the strategy does not stop here. The game does not stop here. So if you look at that paper that I talked about, this Brandenburger and Nailbuff, the right game, it always mentions that whatever game you look at, there is always a bigger game. So don't think that Zomato, by acquiring Uber Eats, have removed competition from the market for Swiggy. It also removed competition from the market for itself, and probably it did better for itself than for Swiggy. What happens to Swiggy is not Zomato's lookout. But Zomato's lookout is I should raise my market share. So if I raise my market share, maybe as a collateral damage, my competitors get some edge. But maybe you don't know, maybe tomorrow my strategy is actually to buy Swiggy out as well. So there can be.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So if there are any questions, please go ahead. Please, please ask. So I guess people had already asked questions during the talk, and
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and thank you very much for this insightful lecture. And we look forward to seeing each other more.
Yes, and those of you, those of you who are interested in game theory, I am just doing a little bit of, I'm playing a little bit of game here, that you can always visit this website. This is a group of game theory and network theory researchers. Sorry, I wrote the address wrong. Yeah, so it's a group of game theory and network theory researchers mainly based out of India. There is a webinar going on, bi-weekly webinar on game theory and network theory, where stalwarts like Kalyan Chatterjee, Kaushik Basu, Harvey Mulan, Matt Jackson, they're all speaking. So you can always join the webinar, and if you are interested. So, okay. Miss Lenka, you say your microphone is not working. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Anirban, then thanks for the lecture.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Manu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.